The 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte by Karl Marx. Condensed by OpenAI's 4.0 model. Audio by ElevenLabs. Chapter 1. Hegel once noted that great historical events repeat themselves, first as tragedy, then as farce. This notion is exemplified in the contrast between the original figures of the French Revolution and their later caricatures. While earlier revolutions invoked the past to elevate their struggles, the events of 1848 to 51 merely parodied it. The French Revolution of 1789 dismantled feudal structures, paving the way for modern bourgeois society. However, in 1848, the revolutionaries could only mimic the past, unable to generate anything truly new. This period saw the rise of a bourgeois republic that suppressed the Parisian proletariat, culminating in the June insurrection's brutal defeat. The bourgeoisie, allied against the proletariat, established a regime of property, family, religion, and order, which crushed any subsequent revolutionary efforts, labeling them as socialism. The repeated defeats of various factions revealed that the Republic had devolved into a despotic rule of one class over another, with society's true needs and the aspirations of the proletariat unmet. As these revolutions unfolded, they lacked the heroism of their predecessors. Instead, they showcased the bourgeoisie's dominance, culminating in a society governed by the very principles it claimed to uphold, yet in practice only served its narrow interests. The final irony lies in the elevation of a figure like Louis Bonaparte, who, far from being a hero, embodied the farcical repetition of history. Chapter 2. The history of the Constitutional National Assembly from June 1848 onward is marked by the rise and fall of the Republican Bourgeois Party, known by various names such as Tricolour Republican and True Republican. Under Louis Philippe, this party formed the official Republican opposition, gaining influence through the press and the national newspaper, which catered to Republican and patriotic sentiments. However, their success was limited. They were a group of bourgeois Republicans advocating for a change in government form, not a broader revolution. When the February Revolution of 1848 occurred, they took power, but their authority lasted only from June 24th to December 10th, 1848. During this period, they framed a republican constitution and imposed a state of siege on Paris. The constitution was essentially a revised version of the 1830 Charter, introducing universal suffrage but maintaining most of the old administrative structures. It granted freedoms with significant caveats, allowing them to be limited for public safety. The Constitution's provisions created a fundamental conflict between the legislative power of the National Assembly and the executive power of the President, leading to an inherent instability. The Assembly had legislative omnipotence, while the President held executive power and the loyalty of the military. This division made the Constitution vulnerable, as it set up a scenario where the Assembly could be dissolved only unconstitutionally. Bonaparte, elected president on December 10, 1848, initially appeared to eclipse himself, allowing the Party of Order to act. However, he quietly observed the party's actions, learning from their mistakes. The Party of Order, consisting of royalists and large bourgeoisie factions, sought to remove the Republican Assembly, which they saw as an obstacle to their goals. The Assembly's dissolution on January 29, 1849, marked the Party of Order's betrayal of parliamentary power, setting the stage for Bonaparte's eventual coup on December 2, 1851. In summary, the Republican Bourgeois Party's brief control ended in failure as they were outmaneuvered by the royalist and bourgeois forces they had empowered. Their downfall paved the way for Bonaparte's seizure of power, culminating in the collapse of the constitution they had crafted. Chapter 3. Between May 29, 1849 and December 2, 1851, the National Assembly's tumultuous period marked the constitutional or parliamentary republic in France. Unlike the upward trajectory of the First French Revolution, where the revolution progressed through increasingly radical stages, the events of 1848 unfolded in reverse, with each party betraying the one it initially supported, leading to a downward spiral. The proletarian party was subordinated to the Democratic Party, which, in turn, relied on the bourgeois republicans. Eventually, the Party of Order pushed aside the bourgeois republicans and relied on the military, leading to the ultimate realization that the military's support had morphed into domination by force. This period was characterized by contradictions. Constitutionalists conspiring against the Constitution, revolutionaries upholding it, and a National Assembly seeking omnipotence but remaining merely parliamentary. Royalists, despite their attachment to monarchy, found themselves supporting a republic they detested. The executive, weak in its authority, found strength in the disdain it inspired. The republic, born from the remnants of two monarchies, became a stage for unfulfilled struggles, periodic tensions, and a history devoid of significant events. Revolutionary passions were drained, and the so-called Red Spectre of the counter-revolution emerged, not as anarchists but as the soldiers of order. The Bonapartist ministry, installed on December 20th, 1849, represented a coalition of legitimists and Orleanists, with the army and the legislative body firmly under the control of the Party of Order. Despite their apparent dominance, the National Assembly's large majority and the public's electoral support merely highlighted the internal conflicts and contradictions. The small traders and the working class, united under the Social Democratic Party, sought to defend their interests, only to be betrayed by the Parliamentary Mountain, which had briefly regained popularity after clashes with Bonaparte and royalist ministers. June 13th, 1849, marked a turning point when the Mountain attempted to impeach Bonaparte over the Roman expedition, only to be crushed by the military and disbanded, weakening both the small traders and their parliamentary influence. The bourgeoisie, having broken the National Guard and the Mountain, solidified its control over the Republic, but in doing so, weakened its own parliamentary power, setting the stage for Bonaparte's eventual consolidation of authority. The bourgeoisie's actions, gagging the press, restricting association rights, and enshrining the state of siege, revealed a deep fear of unbridled class rule, forcing them to retreat into less overtly oppressive forms of governance. In conclusion, this era saw the bourgeoisie dismantling its own defences against absolutism, ultimately undermining the Republic's foundations. Bonaparte's rise was facilitated by the bourgeoisie's reluctance to confront its own contradictions, leading to the disintegration of parliamentary power and the eventual dominance of the executive. Chapter 4. The National Assembly reconvened in October, and on November 1st, Bonaparte dismissed the Barrett-Fallow ministry with little ceremony, signalling his shift away from reliance on the Party of Order. This ministry, composed of legitimists and Orleanists, had been instrumental in dissolving the Republican Constituent Assembly and suppressing the Democratic Party, with Bonaparte initially hiding behind it. However, he soon discarded this facade, asserting his independence from the parliamentary regime. Bonaparte's dismissal of the Barrow ministry marked a critical turning point. The National Assembly, losing control over ministerial posts, saw its influence wane, especially in a highly centralized France, where the executive controlled vast resources and personnel. The bourgeoisie, tied to this governmental structure, inadvertently strengthened the executive power that now stood against it. Bonaparte replaced the ministry with the Hautpoul ministry, notably appointing Fould, a financier, and Karl as prefect of police, solidifying his control. Despite this, Bonaparte's attempts to introduce his own policies were often undermined by his ministers and met with contempt by the National Assembly. His popularity waned as his ambitions seemed laughable, and the bourgeoisie, though ruling absolutely, achieved little beyond regressive measures like the law re-establishing the wine duty and education laws. The discontent among farmers and the irritation caused by government oppression grew, yet the bourgeoisie continued to crush any signs of liberalism, branding all progressive ideas as socialist. This reactionary stance, born from fear of losing control, led to further repression, including the suppression of universal suffrage and free press. Bonaparte's popularity briefly surged with trivial proposals like extra pay for soldiers and a loan bank for workers. But these efforts were shallow. The supplementary elections of March 1850, which saw Social Democrats gain ground, alarmed Bonaparte, forcing him to seek reconciliation with the Party of Order, which failed to capitalize on this opportunity. The Democratic leaders, meanwhile, squandered their electoral victory by avoiding confrontation, leading to a new election law on May 31st, 1850, which restricted voting rights, excluding many from political participation. The proletariat, focused on immediate comforts, failed to resist, further entrenching the bourgeoisie's power. This law was a decisive coup by the bourgeoisie, securing its control by manipulating electoral laws and ensuring the stability of its rule. Chapter 5. The strife between the National Assembly and Bonaparte resurfaced after the revolutionary crisis passed and universal suffrage was abolished. Bonaparte initially granted a salary of 600,000 francs, doubled this sum within 6 months, exploiting moments of weakness in the National Assembly to secure more funds. After the law of May 31st, which disenfranchised millions, Bonaparte threatened the Assembly, demanding an annual civil list of 3 million francs, which was rejected. Instead, he received a one-time allowance of 2,160,000 francs, which he used to further his ambitions. Bonaparte began a covert campaign, travelling through France to garner support and forming the Society of December 10th, a secret organisation of Parisian slum proletariat, vagabonds and criminals loyal to him. This group acted as his private army, impersonating public enthusiasm during his tours and silencing opposition. Tensions escalated between Bonaparte and General Changarnier, the commander of the Army of Paris, who resisted Bonaparte's influence over the military. The National Assembly, divided and cautious, hesitated to confront Bonaparte directly. However, Bonaparte gradually consolidated power by replacing key military leaders with loyalists and dismissing Changarnier, which weakened the Assembly's control over the army. As the National Assembly faltered in its resistance, Bonaparte increasingly sidelined it, eventually appointing a ministry without parliamentary support, concentrating executive power in his hands. The Assembly's attempts to challenge him became increasingly futile, and its influence waned. Bonaparte, now confident in his dominance, moved from defense to offense, culminating in a complete shift in power from the Assembly to the executive. In essence, Bonaparte systematically dismantled the power of the National Assembly, exploiting its internal divisions and using his control over the military and the Society of December 10th to assert his authority, setting the stage for his eventual takeover. Chapter 6. The coalition with the Mountain and Pure Republicans exposed the weakness of the Party of Order, revealing it had lost its independent majority. The National Assembly, facing its final year, had to choose between revising or maintaining the Constitution. Revision meant deciding between bourgeoisie control, democracy, or Bonaparte's rule, Orléans or Bourbon. This divisive issue ignited conflicts within the party, fracturing it back into its original components. Bonapartists sought to abolish Article 45 to enable Bonaparte's re-election. Republicans, controlling over a quarter of the votes, opposed any revision, viewing it as a threat to the Republic. The Party of Order was trapped in contradictions. Voting against revision risked revolutionary chaos. Voting for it would be futile against the Republican veto, and supporting Bonaparte's dominance would lead to imperial usurpation. The Party of Order was a fragile coalition of legitimists and Orleanists, united by the Parliamentary Republic that masked their deeper antagonisms. When the question of revision arose, it revived dynastic rivalries, shattering the party's unity. Efforts to fuse the two royalist factions failed, exposing the impossibility of reconciling their conflicting interests. The revision debate highlighted the Party of Order's impotence. They rejected revision, but the Parliament was increasingly powerless, divided, and disconnected from the bourgeoisie it claimed to represent. Bonaparte capitalized on this, strengthening his position while the assembly dissolved into factions. The bourgeoisie, more interested in stability than political power, began to support Bonaparte's authoritarian tendencies, viewing him as a guardian of order. The Parliament's struggles, combined with a commercial crisis, further eroded confidence in the Republic. By October, Bonaparte prepared his coup, supported by the army and a compliant bourgeoisie. On December 2nd, 1851, he dissolved the assembly, ending the February Revolution and the rule of the bourgeoisie, establishing his dictatorship in a parody of the imperial restoration. Chapter 7. The Social Republic appeared as a mere phrase and prophecy at the threshold of the February Revolution, but it was violently crushed in 1848, only to haunt subsequent events like a spectre. The Democratic Republic briefly emerged, only to collapse in June 1849, scattering empty promises. The Parliamentary Republic, dominated by the bourgeoisie, enjoyed full control until it was buried by the terror-stricken cry of the Royalists on December 2nd, 1851. Long live the Republic! The bourgeoisie, in its attempt to resist proletarian rule, inadvertently brought the slum proletariat to power under Bonaparte, leading to a series of self-destructive measures, including suppressing the press and public meetings, disbanding the National Guard, and enforcing a state of siege, all of which eventually turned against it. The bourgeoisie's rebellion against its own leaders and writers resulted in their suppression, while Bonaparte's dictatorial rule and the apotheosis of the sabre became the new reality. The downfall of the bourgeoisie was inevitable, but any premature uprising by the proletariat would have only revived and united the bourgeoisie and the army against them. The Parisian proletariat, disillusioned and leaderless after Bonaparte's December 1st II raid, left the secret societies to defend Paris's revolutionary honour, while the bourgeoisie, alarmed by Bonaparte's initial threat to abolish the secret ballot, retreated once the threat was rescinded. The proletariat's lack of organisation and unwillingness to fight under the Montagnard banner left them vulnerable to Bonaparte's forces. Despite the bourgeoisie's claim that December 2nd marked socialism's definitive triumph, it actually signalled Bonaparte's victory over Parliament, with the executive power now dominating the legislative. The revolution, though thorough, was still in progress, methodically dismantling the existing order by first ripening the legislative power for overthrow and now focusing on the executive. The revolution was on a path that would eventually culminate in the complete destruction of the executive power, with Europe eventually acknowledging the revolution's thoroughness. Bonaparte, as the head of the Society of December 10th, embodied the executive authority that had grown independent from society, supported by a massive bureaucratic and military apparatus. The Napoleonic myth, born from historical tradition, led the farmers to believe in the return of their former glory under Bonaparte, despite the economic conditions that had turned their once liberating land ownership into a burden. The system of small allotments, initially a symbol of the farmers' freedom, had become a tool of their oppression, with mortgages and taxes burdening the farmer class and turning them into troglodytes. The government, now centred around Bonaparte and his bureaucracy, exploited the farmers and enforced its power through taxation, while the parsons and the army became tools of control, reinforcing the oppressive structure. The revolution's contradictions became evident as Bonaparte, though representing the middle class, broke its political power and tried to balance the demands of different classes, leading to inconsistent policies and growing discontent. Bonaparte's government, harassed by contradictory demands, threw the bourgeois social system into disarray, creating anarchy in the name of order and profaning the machinery of government. The imperial mantle, once sacred, became a parody under Bonaparte's regime, leading to the eventual downfall of the imperial symbol itself. The revolution, relentless in its pursuit, would eventually destroy the bureaucratic and military structure, paving the way for a new centralized government aligned with modern society's needs. The farmers' discontent, The bourgeoisie's fears and the contradictions within Bonaparte's rule foreshadowed a new revolutionary era that would ultimately overthrow the existing order.
Thank you for watching this video by Liberty's Canon. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, and comment to help boost my channel in the algorithm.